The year was 1945. Europe was burning. Cities had turned into graveyards, millions were dead, and the most terrifying war in human history was finally coming to an end. Adolf Hitler's empire was collapsing from every side. Soviet soldiers were marching into Berlin, American forces were crossing deep into Germany, and hidden beneath the ruins of the Nazi regime was something far more dangerous than tanks or bombs. Secret laboratories, classified weapons, experimental aircraft, missiles that could strike cities from hundreds of miles away. And scientists, brilliant scientists who had built machines for Hitler that the world had never seen before. The United States knew one terrifying truth. If those scientists fell into Soviet hands, the next war would already be lost before it even began. So America launched one of the most secretive operations in modern history, an operation so controversial that its details remained hidden for decades. The mission was simple: find the Nazi scientists, erase their pasts, bring them to America, no matter what crimes they were connected to. This operation was called Operation Paperclip. And what happened next would shape the future of rockets, space travel, Cold War technology, and even the moon landing itself. But behind the success story was a dark secret America tried desperately to hide. Because some of the men welcomed into the United States were not just scientists. Some had worked directly for the Nazi war machine, some had witnessed horrors inside concentration camps, and some had used slave labor to build Hitler's weapons. This is the story of how America secretly recruited the minds of the Third Reich and changed the future of the world forever. By the spring of 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing rapidly. Adolf Hitler was hiding in his underground bunker, while Allied bombers destroyed city after city above him. But even as the regime fell apart, intelligence officers from both the United States and the Soviet Union were racing across Germany with a completely different mission. They were searching for Germany's scientific secrets. During the war, Nazi Germany had developed advanced military technology that shocked the world. One of the deadliest inventions was the V-2 rocket, the first long-range guided ballistic missile in history. Designed by German engineer Wernher von Braun and his team, the V-2 could travel faster than the speed of sound and strike targets without warning. Thousands of these rockets were launched against London and other cities, killing civilians and spreading fear everywhere they landed. The technology was decades ahead of its time. American military leaders quickly realized something frightening. If Germany could build weapons like this during the 1940s, then whoever controlled those scientists after the war would dominate the future. At the same time, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were already beginning to grow. Even though both countries had fought together against Hitler, trust between them was disappearing fast. American officials feared that Soviet forces would capture Germany's top scientists and use their knowledge to build advanced weapons of their own. The fear of a future conflict was becoming stronger every day. That fear led to a secret decision inside the United States government. Instead of punishing every German scientist connected to the Nazi regime, America would quietly recruit the most valuable ones. In theory, the scientists would be carefully screened to remove anyone deeply involved in Nazi crimes. But in reality, military intelligence officers often ignored disturbing details if a scientist's knowledge was considered useful enough. The operation first began under a different name called Operation Overcast, but it was later renamed Operation Paperclip because officials attached paperclips to the files of scientists they wanted approved for entry into the United States. Behind the scenes, many records were altered or rewritten to make certain scientists appear less connected to the Nazi Party than they really were. One of the most important targets was Wernher von Braun. Tall, intelligent, ambitious, and obsessed with rockets since childhood, von Braun had dreamed of space travel long before the war began. As a young engineer, he became one of the leading figures in Germany's rocket program. But his dreams of space became tied directly to Hitler's military ambitions. Under Nazi control, von Braun's team built the V-2 rocket at a secret facility called Peenemünde. Later, production moved underground to a massive factory called Mittelwerk, where thousands of prisoners from concentration camps were forced to work under brutal conditions. The workers suffered starvation, beatings, disease, and constant terror. Many died building the rockets. Historians estimate that more people died producing the V-2 rockets than were actually killed by the rockets themselves. After the war, questions about von Braun's knowledge of these horrors would follow him for the rest of his life. But in 1945, American officials cared more about his scientific talent than his past. As Germany collapsed, von Braun and several members of his rocket team decided to surrender to American forces instead of the Soviets. They believed the United States would give them a better future and more freedom to continue their research. American soldiers quickly took them into custody and transported them to safety. Soon afterward, thousands of documents, rocket parts, blueprints, and scientific reports were also collected and shipped to America. The United States did not want to lose a single piece of German technology. In total, more than 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians would eventually be brought to America through Operation Paperclip. Many arrived quietly and secretly. The American public knew almost nothing about the program. Officially, the United States had just defeated Nazi Germany and exposed the horrors of concentration camps to the world. Bringing former Nazi scientists into the country would have caused outrage if people fully understood what was happening. So much of the operation remained hidden behind classified files and government secrecy. Once inside America, the scientists were placed at military bases and research centers across the country. Some worked in Texas, others worked in New Mexico, Alabama, and Ohio. Their job was to help the United States build better missiles, aircraft, and weapons before the Soviet Union could do the same. One of the main testing locations became White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico. There, captured V-2 rockets were rebuilt and launched under American supervision. The tests allowed U.S. engineers to study rocket technology in ways that would have been impossible otherwise. Slowly, German wartime science became the foundation of America's future missile program. But Operation Paperclip was not only about rockets. The United States also recruited experts in aviation, chemistry, medicine, and intelligence. Some scientists had conducted deeply unethical human experiments during the war. Others had worked closely with high-ranking Nazi officials. Yet during the early Cold War, American leaders increasingly believed that scientific advantage mattered more than moral questions. The race against the Soviet Union had already begun. By the late 1940s, tensions between East and West exploded into what became known as the Cold War. The world now lived under the shadow of nuclear weapons and constant fear. The Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic bomb in 1949, shocking American leaders and increasing the urgency of military research. Suddenly, Operation Paperclip seemed even more important. German scientists were no longer seen simply as former enemies. They were now considered valuable assets in a dangerous global competition. Wernher von Braun eventually became one of the most famous scientists in America. His image changed dramatically over the years. Instead of being remembered mainly as a former Nazi engineer, he became a public symbol of American space exploration. He appeared on television programs, gave interviews, wrote articles about space travel, and inspired millions of Americans with visions of rockets reaching the moon. During the 1950s, he worked for the U.S. Army developing ballistic missiles. Later, when NASA was created in 1958, von Braun became one of the central figures in America's space program. His team developed the Saturn V rocket, the massive machine that would eventually carry Apollo astronauts to the moon. In July 1969, when Apollo 11 successfully landed astronauts on the lunar surface, many people celebrated it as one of humanity's greatest achievements. Yet hidden behind that victory was the complicated history of Operation Paperclip. The same scientific knowledge that helped send men to the moon had originally been developed under Hitler's regime during one of history's darkest periods. For some people, this created an uncomfortable question. Could scientific progress ever truly be separated from the crimes committed to achieve it? The debate surrounding Operation Paperclip continued for decades. Supporters argued that the United States had no choice. If America had refused to recruit German scientists, the Soviet Union would have taken them instead. During the Cold War, military and technological superiority could determine the survival of entire nations. From this perspective, Operation Paperclip was a strategic necessity. It helped America develop missiles, satellites, aviation systems, and space technology faster than its rivals. Some accused the government of deliberately hiding evidence to make certain scientists appear innocent. Declassified documents later revealed that officials sometimes cleaned up records or ignored troubling information to secure approval for valuable recruits. To critics, Operation Paperclip represented a dangerous moment when political fear became more important than justice. One especially disturbing issue involved the use of slave labor at Mittelwerk. Prisoners forced to build V-2 rockets lived under horrifying conditions inside underground tunnels. Survivors described constant hunger, violence, and death surrounding them every day. Thousands never left the tunnels alive. Although some scientists later claimed they had little control over the camps, many historians believe key figures knew far more than they admitted after the war. Wernher von Braun himself visited the facility multiple times. The exact extent of his responsibility remains debated, but the moral shadow never fully disappeared. During the 1970s and 1980s, more information about Operation Paperclip slowly became public. Journalists, historians, and investigators uncovered classified records that painted a more complicated picture than the heroic version many Americans had heard during the space race. Some former Nazi scientists had indeed been deeply connected to the regime. Others had joined the Nazi Party willingly. The idea that America had secretly protected such individuals shocked many people when the details became widely known. Yet even with the controversy, the influence of Operation Paperclip on modern history is impossible to ignore. German rocket research became a major foundation for both military missiles and space exploration during the 20th century. Technologies developed through those programs eventually contributed to satellite communications, weather forecasting, scientific research, and human spaceflight. The operation helped transform the United States into the world's leading space power. At the same time, it also revealed how fear can reshape moral boundaries during moments of global conflict. The Cold War created an atmosphere where governments believed survival justified extreme decisions. Operation Paperclip became one of the clearest examples of that mindset. In many ways, the operation symbolized the complicated reality of the post-war world. The Allies had defeated Nazi Germany militarily, but they also inherited pieces of its scientific machine. Instead of destroying all traces of that knowledge, they absorbed it into their own systems. The line between former enemy and future ally became blurred by politics, technology, and fear of Soviet expansion. Even today, historians continue debating whether the operation was necessary, immoral, or both at the same time. Some argue that history forced impossible choices onto world leaders after World War II. Others believe justice should never have been compromised, regardless of political pressure. The truth may exist somewhere in between. Operation Paperclip was neither a simple success story nor a simple betrayal. It was a deeply complicated chapter shaped by ambition, fear, scientific progress, and the desperate struggle for power in a divided world. Perhaps the strangest part of the story is how ordinary citizens knew almost nothing about it for so many years. While Americans watched rockets launch into space and celebrated technological triumphs, few realized how much of that progress traced back to scientists once connected to Hitler's regime. The secrecy surrounding the operation allowed the government to carefully control the narrative presented to the public. Only decades later did the full ethical questions begin reaching mainstream attention. Today, Operation Paperclip remains one of the most controversial intelligence programs in American history. To some, it represents strategic brilliance that helped secure victory in the Cold War and advance human exploration beyond Earth. To others, it represents a dangerous compromise where morality was sacrificed in exchange for scientific advantage. But regardless of opinion, the operation changed the course of history forever. The rockets that once terrorized cities during World War II eventually evolved into the machines that carried astronauts toward the stars. The same technology born from destruction became the foundation for exploration. And behind it all stood the hidden story of scientists transported across the ocean under classified orders. Their pasts buried beneath government files marked with a simple paperclip. The legacy of Operation Paperclip still echoes through modern history, because it forces humanity to confront difficult questions that never fully disappear. How far should a nation go to protect itself? Can scientific achievement erase moral responsibility? And when fear dominates political decisions, what principles are people willing to abandon in the name of survival? Those questions remain just as relevant today as they were in the dangerous years after World War II. Because Operation Paperclip was never only about rockets or scientists. It was about power, fear, ambition, and the cost of winning the future. And perhaps that is why the story continues to fascinate the world decades later. Beneath the classified documents, secret deals, and technological triumphs lies a disturbing truth about human history itself. Sometimes the line between hero and villain becomes blurred when nations believe the fate of the world is at stake. And sometimes the future is built using pieces of a past that people would rather forget.